Hello, everyone, and welcome to our super fun Utah Tech Leads conversation, I would say, about sex and the workplace. We're so grateful that all of you could join us, and we will be making this recording available after the fact as well. Shout out to Kyle, who I think is in the audience right now. So my name is Elizabeth Converse. I'm the Executive Director of Utah Tech Leads. If you've been watching our videos for a while, you've heard this spiel about a million times. I've worked in state and local politics for the past 20 years. I am actually that old. Sunny, who also gets the age remark pretty frequently. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yep. So Sunny Washington, I'm the CEO of Utah Tech Leads. I do not come from the politics side. I come mostly from the tech side. And Liz and I started Utah Tech Leads because we saw an interesting intersection between tech companies and Utah politics and how we could have influence. This is a very interesting topic that we're addressing today. So it should be fun. And I hope that all of you are comfortable enough to put your comments and questions and in here, and then we will try and address as many as we can. I think for us, there's certainly a lot of maybe angst around this, but the goal here is just to be open to having these conversations and hopefully making our work environments better for everyone.
So we're going to go ahead and get started. And I want to be very clear that we're not here to out anyone. We are here to share our own experiences and experiences that have been given to us to be shared, because one of the biggest things that is consistently missing from the conversation about sexual harassment and sexual discrimination is the actual examples. We tend to pretend that, oh, we can create this line and talk about this line without talking about people crossing the line. And that's just unrealistic. I think Sunny and I have heard a lot of men over the past several years say, well, now I can't even hug the people that I normally hug, or I can't even make an off-color joke in the workplace anymore. And that makes things pretty significantly difficult to navigate when you're sitting there with your own stories, looking at these people and willing to give them feedback, but you're pretty sure they're not willing to listen. So we're doing it in this venue. So I want to give a specific definition, very specific definition. So sexual harassment is unwelcome conduct that is based on gender, okay? So unwelcome conduct based on gender. That doesn't mean joking around with your friends. That means you consistently crossing boundaries with someone that you work with, and those boundaries have been made clear. So the two examples given here are enduring the offensive conduct as a condition of continued employment, which I think a lot of women have experienced, or the conduct is severe or pervasive enough to create a hostile work environment. So again, this doesn't necessarily have to be, hey, warning, this is gonna get explicit. Hey, I'm not gonna try to, sleep with you unless you need a raise. That's the only way that you're gonna get that raise, or other types of situations. So Sunny, why do you think that this is such an important topic to be talking about right now?
Well, I think there's, I come from a generation where when I started working in tech, I was definitely one of the few women. And so being sexually harassed was just part of the job. Now, I don't want to paint it like we were like Mad Men, and that kind of, we certainly have made progress since then. But me being, when I first started out my career very young, one of the few women, it's just something you had to put up with. And honestly, when it did happen, I didn't know there wasn't, Me Too, and there wasn't really an easy avenue for me to feel like I could talk to anyone about this. And I think things have progressed in such a way that that behavior is being called out. But I think there's still a lot of confusion. And I think just like what you were saying, Liz, people say, well, I can't give you a hug. And so everybody's either afraid of breaking a boundary. People are afraid of being too sensitive. And I think it's just time to have a really open conversation about it. Having if you've been in, working in tech as long as I have, I guarantee every single female has been sexually harassed at one time or another. I mean, it's just an expectation. And I don't know of anyone who really did anything about it. It just wasn't something that we did. So I find it interesting, and I find it incredibly inspiring that there are women that are speaking up about it now and saying, hey, that's not okay. And I love it when men are saying, hey, we don't tolerate this, or they're standing up for women. I think that is something that I never saw, even 10 years ago. So I think it's a really interesting time for us to talk about it. And there's certainly some local things happening. We've seen some stories happening in politics. There has been stuff happening at tech companies as well. So it's an interesting time to address all of this.
Absolutely. So, like you mentioned, there have been a lot of recent stories developing about sexual harassment, specifically in the workplace, specifically with younger adults. And I find it absolutely awe-inspiring that there are so many more people willing to talk about what they've experienced. And I think that for our generation, it's becoming something more mainstream to not just whisper in the hallways or like chat in the bathroom, but to actually have these conversations outright. And to your point, when the USU did a study of women in Utah, and this cracks me up, I'm gonna totally admit this. It says 1 in 2 women have experienced sexual harassment, which like I call bullshit on that. Like if you're probably just trying to play nice at that point, because I can't think of a single woman who has not had a discriminating remark made about her. Not necessarily, again, I want to sleep with you, but like, you don't deserve that pay raise because you don't have a family, like all sorts of crazy things. But the really interesting fact is that immediately when asked the question, 25% of Utah women said yes, they had been sexually harassed or sexually discriminated against. And when they were given definitions and examples, that number jumped to above 40%. So like, again, these examples make all of the difference, right? They change the way that women react and interact with each other, and it changes the way that our dynamics at work play out. And I feel like I've been very lucky to have Sunny as our CEO. It's been wonderful working for a woman again for the first time in a really, really long time. Not to say men are awful, they're not, they're just a different bag. But there have been a lot of circumstances and almost institutional discrimination. Very specifically, there was a time where I was being aggressively harassed by someone, and I went to the male in charge, and he told me to just go to dinner and deal with it, and it would be over. And then I went to the second in charge, who was a woman, and she told me that because I was a woman in Utah politics, I just kind of had to deal with it. And it was a very shocking experience for me. It was something that I wasn't really ready for, and it was almost as shocking as the original experience itself. I didn't expect another woman to be so flippant or blasé about my genuine concern at that point. I mean, I don't think any of us take random flirting or obnoxious comments to their superiors without some consideration. I think there's a big chunk of us who would much rather deal with it and move on and not have those kinds of conversations unless it gets pretty abhorrent, to be honest. Have you had any of those kinds of conversations, Sunny?
Yeah, and I mean, to be honest, there was probably a period in my time where if I was much younger managing people and someone came to me with this, I didn't have this experience, I wouldn't know what to do, and it'd probably be like, well, it's just kind of part of the job, and I'll tell you one experience I had. So, young in my career, I traveled a lot, working for a sales team, and I got sent on a trip with my boss, who was, basically my father's age, and it was a very uncomfortable situation, put me in a tough spot, and anyways, I didn't know what it would do to my career by me turning him down. And then about 10 years ago, maybe it was even like 5 years ago, I went to lunch with my old team, and they started joking about that experience. They said, oh, remember how much that guy had a crush on Sunny and how he specifically requested that she go on this trip with him. And I kind of sat there, not like years later, and with, you know, the maturity that I've had and the experience that I had, and I was like, wait a minute, that was an awful trip for me. And you guys knowingly sent me into that situation. And I cannot, you know, and I didn't even know what to say. I was like, I was pretty upset. You know, I was hurt because I couldn't believe they thought it was funny. Oh, this old guy likes this young girl. And he wants her to go travel, so let's just send her. And I just, you know, it really kind of tainted, because, you know, they had an opportunity to be like, hey, maybe that's not a good idea, or maybe we could send someone else, or even warn me, you know, but I went on this so unknowingly, and that was really frustrating to me. So yeah, you know, if I could go back, I probably would have those conversations, but it's like these things that I discover, now that I'm like, gosh, I hope that if I'm ever in a situation to like give advice, I'd give better advice or help interfere somehow so someone doesn't have to experience that.
Absolutely. And I think it, especially when you're so early in your career, and let's be real, the vast majority of sexual harassment and sex-based discrimination happens to women between the ages of 20 and 40. Like that's just, for whatever reason, that's where the numbers are the highest. And it's kind of shocking. And I mean, it's not terribly surprising that men suddenly stop being interested in harassing people who are over the age of 40, but that is like a pinnacle of it. And a big part of that, I think, is because women at that age, that early in their career, aren't empowered. They don't feel like they can speak up. They don't feel like they can say something. It's there was a time that I've shared with some friends where and this happened at the Capitol. I was walking up a set of stairs, and the stairs in the back hallways have grating in between them, so you can actually see through the stairs from whatever floor you're on. And I was walking up a set of stairs, and there was a legislator going into their own caucus room, and I stopped on the landing so that he could continue through the door to his caucus room without potentially upskirting me. And he told me to keep going, that he wanted to watch me walk up the stairs. And that was a dramatically shocking experience for me, because I thought I was doing the appropriate thing by not even like potentially exposing him to any kind of risk, right? Whatever that means. But no, that's why he was there in that moment. That was the decision that he made, and the words that he decided to have come out of his face, which was kind of shocking. That right there, sexual harassment. And it's these little interactions that can build and build and build and build. Sunny, tell me a little bit about what you think, seeing all of these recent stories about a single specific legislator. Like, what does that mean for the state as a whole? And how do you see kind of industries reacting to that?
You know, I mean, you know, I come from a different world, you know, and so I would like to think, you know, now if I went to an HR professional and I said, hey, this person is, you know, physically harassing me, and touching, and you know, that kind of stuff, that there would be some words exchanged. And I don't know in this specific case what has been done. The frustrating thing for me is that, you know, in politics, these are people that we elect and we choose, you know, to be in these roles. And so you would hope that they um display the most upstanding behavior, you know, as being a representative. And when they're not, and it's allowed to go on for so long, that's super frustrating. You know, it's super frustrating as a community member. It's super frustrating as a taxpayer. You know, all of these things that, you know, why do we allow for this to happen? And the thing is I think that there is a level of tolerance, you know. So for example, you know, that legislator that, you know, made that comment to you was maybe he thought that that was a compliment. You know, I'm going to tell you, most women don't think that's a compliment, but you know, maybe he thought he was being complimentary. Gosh, God, I would have hoped that someone pulled him aside and said, hey dude, That's not cool. Don't say that. So
I
it's not,
honestly, I didn't
yeah.
report him. So I'm sure nobody said a word to him because I didn't report him, but I didn't feel like I
Well,
could report him either. There are those circumstances where you don't know what to do. You're young, especially if
yeah.
you're in a small staff situation, you don't want to like make too many big ripples, but it was jarring.
Yeah, and I think that that's probably indicative of most situations. Like you don't often sit there and say, well, my here comes my sexual harassment. It usually, comes and we are all surprised by it. We all don't always know how to react. We think back when it happens and say, I should have said this, or I should have done this. Um, but that's why, I don't think we'll ever really solve this, but I think the more that it's called out, and it doesn't have to be a big, it didn't have to get to the point where, dozens and dozens of women had to sign a letter saying, we won't tolerate this. It could have been handled way before then. And just with someone being pulled aside, and talked to. I'll never forget one time I was at a conference and one of my I had just negotiated a contract with some partners from out of the country, and it was all day negotiation, and we finally signed the deal. And then I showed up to the cocktail party, and they were like, well, if you were wearing that dress, we would have probably given you, a better deal or something like that, and again, it's like, okay, they're trying to compliment me. I feel a little uncomfortable because they're now clients. I didn't feel like I could call them out. But what was so great is one of my male colleagues and said, hey, that you can't say that to her. That's not appropriate. And I will be forever grateful that they did that, because then it wasn't me always having to stand up for myself. Um, I didn't want to jeopardize a deal. I didn't want to jeopardize a relationship, but he could do it, and there was no sweat off of his back to do it. And I'm always, and that's happened so few times, but I am so grateful that they did that. And I think the more that men do that, or people around, say something, the more it just puts them on notice. And I think that there's sometimes some more casual ways you can do that, and saying like, hey, that's not cool, or hey, that doesn't seem really or appropriate, just as a, even as a friend, letting them know. I think you're doing everybody a favor by doing that, but especially the women that, we constantly have to stand up for ourselves, and taking that burden off of us is huge.
Yeah, so I have a personal experience that I'm going to share, and I'm going to out myself. So everybody brace yourselves. This is going to be super dramatic. It's not that dramatic. I was at a volunteer organization conference with a group of people from my state and people from all across the country. And someone that I knew pretty well was in a hallway, and I was walking the opposite direction, and he was going the other direction. And it was after hours, and we had all been drinking and having a good time. And as he walked the other direction, I smacked him on the butt. And I will forever regret that. Not just because it's physical contact in public with somebody that, like, he's a friend. Everybody knew we were friends, but he pulled me aside and he was very clear. He was like, we are supposed to be better than this. And it didn't occur to me that it would ever make him uncomfortable. It didn't. It absolutely didn't. But I can guarantee you that I have absolutely never crossed that line since, with him or anybody else, because somebody said something, because somebody defined a line, because somebody helped me understand how they felt in that situation. And I had felt that way in so many situations, and it was never my intent to make him feel that way, but I did. Something I did made someone feel really, really uncomfortable, and they talked to me about it, and never again, absolutely never again. And it can be those small conversations where people, like, predators are going to be predators, hands down. That's not going to stop. We're not talking about, like, bad people with guns, good people with guns kind of a fight. No, bad people are going to be bad people, but there are people who accidentally cross the line pretty regularly because they simply don't know, or they haven't been in an environment where they've been made to feel that uncomfortable as well. And I think that makes a huge difference. So I'm going to read a submitted story really quickly. I was at a golf event, and as I greeted an older gentleman who was over 60. He commented on my shapely ass for comfort for sitting on, then proceeded to play with my ponytail as I was sitting in a golf cart. I was too new at the company and he was too respected for me to be offended. I was so embarrassed and thought he was a dirty old man, but it came with the job and being in public relations. I think I've definitely experienced that. Like, and it's that kind of, oh, well, they're just trying to be complimentary, kind of like what you were saying. Well, some of them don't know how to compliment people, and some of them are just creepy. They're just creepy
Yeah.
dudes. But especially when you're relatively new to an organization, you don't have that strength to, or that support to come forward and be like, hey, you know, this really powerful guy that you guys have been talking to and talking about for a really long time and really respect, he's a dick. You know,
Yeah.
it's really, really difficult.
I think too, like, you know, when you don't, let's see, when you work at an organization and there's a reputation that they're not going to do anything, like, what's the point, right? What's the point of saying anything? And then also, there starts to be like a little bit of a whisper campaign, you know, like between women, and be like, hey, be careful, or, you know, you start to just warn other people, and that's not healthy for an organization either. And you know, and that's the thing, is you can't prevent everything from happening. You know, things are going to just happen, but I think it's this bit of like nipping it in the bud is really important, just to address that. And you know, I'll never like, I another time I was on a trip, and this client, a customer of ours, was all over me. I mean, it was out of control. And I mean, the guy would not get the hint, you know. And I was young. I felt very uncomfortable. I was in a strange city. I didn't know how, this was like before the time of Uber, you know, so I wasn't sure where to get a cab and how to get home and, you know, get out of there. And just it was humiliating because it was in front of my colleagues. The next day I was like to my colleague that was with me, I said, gosh, I can't believe this guy wouldn't like get the hint, you know. And he said, oh, when you went to the bathroom, I just told him that you play hard to get. And so like, he was just encouraging, and it was a miserable night. I mean, I was just very, very like upset. He thought he was being funny, you know, but he was my superior. What was I supposed to do, you know? And he was just egging this on, and it makes it really tough, you know, because, you know, do you put your career on the line? Do you freak out? You know, what do you do? What's the right scenario for that? You know, and even now, I just don't know why he did that, you know. But at the time, he just thought he was being funny, and he was enjoying the show, you know. So and that's really unfortunate.
Yeah, and that kind of culture is without boundaries, I would say. Like, there are no single industries that are isolated in those exact types of experiences. That happens across the board. And it's really, really disappointing, because then the onus becomes so clearly centered on the individual who is either frightened or uncomfortable or doesn't know how to exit the situation, rather than the person who is committing that type of behavior. And it's, what do you do? What do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you can always plan for it, but I think it's like, certainly, I had a situation where there was another client in for our user conference. He was a big client. He was very drunk. And the two people that were supposed to watch him were putting him on a bus to take us back to the hotel. And he was making some very inappropriate comments to me as he was getting on the bus. And my two coworkers were like, okay, see ya, bye. And they left. And I was pissed, you know, because now he was my problem. And I did call them and talk to their boss, and I said, that is not cool. You knew the exact state that he was in, and you heard the things he said to me, and you still chose him to leave him with me and to deal with. That is your responsibility, you know, and you made it my problem. And so, you know, I mean, and that's me having a little bit more experience at that point. But it doesn't make it okay, because I was pretty upset. I don't think in my 20s I would have probably called someone and told them off about that. I would certainly do that now. Thankfully, I'm over 40, so hopefully I get no
Hey,
sexual
I
harassment.
said targeted population. It doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It just means it happens a lot.
Yes, one
It's
of
a bell
the
curve.
benefits
It's
of
a bell
getting old.
curve. It's a bell curve. I'll explain it like that. So speaking actually of those targeted populations, women in low-paying service occupations, women of color, undocumented migrants, and members of the queer community. And as a member of the queer community, I would love to address this a little bit because I have what's perceived to be a straight relationship, and my husband is wonderful and I adore him. So this is not me talking shit on him at all. But there have been many, many circumstances where people either find out that I'm a member of the queer community or have known for a while, and then all of a sudden ask me, well, do you miss it? Do I miss what?
Yeah.
Do I miss a personal relationship with intimacy? No, because I've got that. They're asking, do I miss the alternative genitals? Like, at what point can you imagine asking a person that directly? Do you miss other genitals? Can you imagine even like saying those words out
No,
loud, especially in a
no.
working situation? Like, there's a difference between like, hey, talk to me about your experience and like how that works for you, because I've never really had a conversation with somebody who's in that situation. That is a friendship, experience to experience sharing. But do you miss it? Like, and I had people ask me that when I was in relationships with women, and we all know what they meant by that. Do you miss penis?
Right,
That's
right.
exactly what it was. And you can't even fathom asking these specific questions, but it is like a consistent commentary on targeted populations where people, it doesn't occur to them, oh, maybe we shouldn't say that, or maybe you shouldn't ask that, or I don't know, just stop talking. There are certain things
So what's the rule? Like, if you won't say it in front of your mother, you won't say it at all. Like, what is the rule that we give to that? How do they know what is crossing the line?
I tend to tell men specifically, if you wouldn't say it to your dude friends, don't say it to me. It's that
Mm,
simple. A joke is a joke. If you're making a joke, and not making a joke at my expense, but if you're telling a joke that has its own premise, even if it's inappropriate, I'm willing to let that slide a hell of a lot more than if you're asking me about my sex and sexuality, if you're talking to me about the types of clothing that you prefer women wear. I had someone once tell me that he really liked corsets, and we were at a business lunch, and he's telling
yeah.
me that he really likes corsets and that he was wild in his youth. And it's like, what? Why the hell do you think I'm interested in this? Let alone like, why is this coming out of your mouth? And guess what, guys? It was not John Stannard. It was not the guy who actually has that in his name attached to that in the press. It was not that guy. It was somebody else. So there's been a lot of, I think, growth in different communities about this. And I've been really excited to see this next generation who is willing to be so vocal about these kinds of situations and kind of force change in a really healthy, positive way. Have you seen any of that in your own experiences?
Oh yeah, I mean I think it's probably, I would say it's probably better, but I'm also over 40, so I'm not seeing it as much personally happen to me. But I have been a little, like, there are times, like, I remember, one time a guy that worked for me, I found out later that he was getting paid more than me. And when I asked my boss, he said, well, it's because he has a family and you don't. And I was like, oh my gosh, and then, like, not only just like a couple years ago, I was talking to this young girl and she had the same thing just happen to her, like, that year. So I was a little dismayed to hear that that was, like, still a thing, because I was like, have we made no progress? But at the same time, I do think that there is awareness. I think companies are, being more proactive about this. It's a liability if they don't address it. I'm curious though, like what happens in politics? Because like these legislators, like some of them are like developers, they don't work at companies. They might be from rural Utah and not like been around a lot of, women, or I don't know, I'm not trying to, make fun of them, but it's maybe they don't have the same experience. And so what does the state do? What does the state do to protect, themselves from sexual harassment incidences?
So this was really fun. When I worked at the state and now as a registered lobbyist, you take this essential webinar with a little quiz embedded in the webinar where it's like, this is sexual harassment. And it like gives you 4 scenarios and you have to pick which one. And it's almost like always all of the above, but it is the dumbest and least expressive experience in sexual harassment training that I've ever witnessed. Like, and it
So
was
everybody has to pass this in
yeah.
order to work on the Hill. Okay.
Yeah, and it's really hard to fail. Like it's really hard to fail. And I know that there are different modules based on your interaction with people. So I know that like administrators who are managing other people have to take one that's a little bit more intense. Legislators take a slightly different one. Staff takes a slightly different one, which doesn't really make sense. Like sexual harassment is sexual harassment is
Yeah.
sexual. So there shouldn't be any like weird edits there. But yeah, it was dumb. It was laughably dumb because especially like I'm filling this out. You have to do it annually. I was working at the Capitol and I'm laughing while I'm filling this out and like chatting with my colleague about how these lines aren't even a concept. Like these lines have been crossed so many times that I don't think that the individual legislators could really understand how bad it got. And I had a conversation recently with somebody who was like, maybe I just don't see it. And I was like, yeah, you don't. And it's not through any fault of their own. I only recently started talking about my experiences, and it's not every single legislator either. There are a lot of really great legislators out there, but especially when you're talking about sexual harassment in the form of sex discrimination, that becomes really problematic because there are so many people in public office or in government who hold that stupid Mike Pence rule, and they refuse to meet with a woman alone.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah, I was just going to ask you to explain the Mike Pence rule. So yeah.
So these individuals won't meet with anyone of the opposite sex by themselves. They will have an intern present, which I don't ever care if there's an intern, but sometimes they'll force their spouses to join. And it's like, I don't think your spouse really wants to hear about education funding policy. Like, what are you doing? Like, this isn't, but it is still that kind of situation where they are so uncomfortable. And to what it tells me is they are so uncomfortable with their own ability to control themselves that they are willing to negatively impact not only their service to the state, but my professional relationship with them because of that. And that makes no sense to me, because if I send a guy in and they just go and they do and they take care of it and it's done, great. Why am I any different? What is the value of my work, and how is that value different from somebody doing the exact same work?
Yeah, I think that so I've certainly encountered people who had that same rule. I found it incredibly offensive because it all just all of a sudden made like a regular meeting or a lunch like feel awkward, like there was a underlying sexual tension that I didn't know was there. So I would find offense to that. And I remember saying to one guy, I was like, hey, how about we just promise not to sleep with each other, and like, let's just call it out, and because that's not going to happen. You're not my type, but yeah, that is and what it ends up doing is, in that situation is if someone has that rule, then like they're inevitably going to meet with more men, and then those men may get more opportunities than the women would just by nature of, their gender, which is really unfortunate, and so when we think of parity in the workplace, that is one way to, create a scenario where there is not parity based on who you are. I think there's a really interesting question, Liz, about navigating this, that Adam posted in here, navigating social and work. So like you go out and have happy hour, or you go do something social, and then maybe it's a little bit more of casual environment. And when you see these harassment situations, I certainly, the experience I told you about my colleague, encouraging someone that was out when we were having drinks, so I have seen that. I don't, what are your thoughts on that? Like, is it, is it, or do the lines change, when you're out social versus, in the workplace?
I think they do, but I think they change because of like the reporting structure, right? So like if you're out and you're drinking and you're having a good time with friends and colleagues, if somebody's uncomfortable, they should be able to say that at any point. Hey, like that's not really okay, or this isn't cool, or I'm going to walk over here while you guys finish that joke, or all sorts of things. You can do all sorts of things, but especially in that second question, when do I speak up for someone who I think is being harassed? And it's the minute that you as an individual are made uncomfortable, because sexual harassment isn't just one person affecting another person. It affects an entire environment. And I think that's one of the reasons why we try to address it as hard as we can, especially in work environments, because it really does, it impacts everybody around you. And whether you're at a bar or whether you're in your office, no matter what, that next day is going to be awkward for everybody. And sometimes it needs to be awkward. Sometimes people need to speak up or say something, and it needs to get a little weird for it to get right. And if it does get weird, the likelihood that you are going to be able to have better working relationships, you're automatically going to get more respect from the person who was being harassed. You're probably going to get more respect from the person who is doing the harassing, because they recognize that you're a person of integrity. And it just kind of compiles that way in these strange, tiny little interactions that we don't often think about. But if you at any point are uncomfortable in a social situation, you should say something. Even if the other parties aren't uncomfortable, if you're uncomfortable, you're experiencing something that you should speak up about.
So when have you ever spoken up and it's backfired on you?
Oh God, like anytime I've gone, are you kidding me? For those of you who haven't Googled my name, thank you, and I greatly appreciate it. But if you Google my name, and with Utah, sorry, there's a whole bunch of us, we're like, all across the world, Elizabeth Converse is everywhere. But the backfiring is huge. There is a ton of pushback and doubt and assumed dishonesty whenever someone goes public. I went public several years ago with a group of women about a specific individual, and it was really, really difficult. It was difficult to make the decision. I remember crying on the phone with my husband when I finally made the decision. Yes, I'm going to include my story. And we didn't identify which women were attached to which story. We just didn't, because it's unnecessary. It's all inappropriate behavior. You don't need to know who is attached to what story, because some of them were middle-aged, some of them were older, some of them were younger. There are different types of people who were included in this group. But even with those broad examples, I was called a liar. I was called a slut. People told other people that I was quite literally asking for it. Like we make jokes about using that language, but in private conversations, it does get used. And we talk about whisper networks about like women warning other women, but there are whisper networks at work against all of those women and against all of that warning, specifically to defame other people who do go forward. It's been awful.
Yeah. What's the upside, right? So like, something happens to you, what's the upside,
Well, and that's the thing. There very rarely is an upside. One of the reasons, there was a specific incident with someone at the legislature that I was so shocked by. The one that my two superiors told me, one of them told me to just go to dinner and get it over with, and the other one told me there was a woman in Utah politics, so I should just get used to it. So there was additional incidents, obviously it didn't stop, that I spoke to other people about and found out that he was doing very similar things to other individuals within our organization. And that was when I really decided to start having those conversations out loud with other people in authority, specifically to protect future individuals, right? A lot of times women don't come forward because something happened to them. They come forward because they feel an overwhelming need to protect other women from it happening to them too. And that's really kind of a motivating factor for me. But even then, and even with that legislator being told that they weren't allowed to speak to me, which they have not since then, they have kept to that line. It's still, there's still the rumor mill going around that there's no way that these two separate instances could have happened to the same woman, like as if a woman can only be sexually harassed by one person in her entire lifetime.
Right. So then, maybe it's you. Maybe you're the problem, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's what's really interesting is that there's this automatic assumption sometimes of what did the woman do? What did the woman, what situation did she put herself in? What was she wearing? How did she behave? There's all those questions. I do. So this was a couple of years ago. So the one guy that I told you about, my boss, that when we went on a trip, and made it really uncomfortable. I met his ex-wife at an event not too long ago. This is like a year and a half ago. Or I guess it was right before COVID. So anyways, I said, hey, so-and-so, like, I used to work with your husband. The first thing she said was, did he hit on you? And I was like, what? Yeah, I mean, not even like, nice to meet you. Did he hit on you? And I said, at this point, I'm not protecting anyone. I said, yes. And she said, I knew it. He was such a cheater, all of this stuff. But it was just so funny to me, that like, clearly he had a reputation for that, and then to have to like encounter that same situation of being uncomfortable again, I would have never brought that situation up with her, but she knew it. And I found that just to be a really like fascinating experience. But I actually had a great laugh at it because, it was funny.
And I feel like at that point, when it gets back to the spouse, when it has become such an issue that lots and lots of people are aware, people don't know who should take responsibility for that. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And they're like, well, yeah, I knew, but I didn't know for sure because it hadn't happened to me. So I didn't feel appropriate saying something. And I think this is a little bit to Adam's point. If you're aware, you're aware. If you're aware and you say nothing, you are complicit. And there are a lot of people on that letter who are absolutely complicit in the continued sexual harassment and sex discrimination to women in the Utah political sphere. And it's, I'm grateful that they signed on. I'm grateful that they feel like they hold these values. But the reality of the situation is, if you're aware and you say nothing, you are adding to the silencing and to the future injury of any number of people. It could be any number of people. And she knew to ask you because she had a sneaking suspicion. And your coworkers thought it was funny because they knew. And they kept putting you in a situation that puts you at risk. Like what would happen if that individual had been a violent person?
Right. No, I mean, I think about it all the time. And, I was 22 at the time, so in a city that I was not familiar with, pretty new in my career. I hadn't traveled a lot for work. There's just lots of situations that were not necessarily safe, for me. And I think about that a lot. And that's why, I could not help but be bitter with, my friends, people who I admired and respected for voluntarily putting me in that situation. And maybe they had joked about it before, I don't remember, but I just remember at that moment when we were meeting for lunch, I was like, you asshole. I mean, that was my immediate thought, like, you sent me on that trip? Like, that's crazy. I would never do that to an employee. If a man said, hey, why don't you send that young girl with me? I would not send her on that trip. And I don't think that guy would be working for the company, for making that, feeling comfortable enough to make that request. So the fact that that happened was just really, really shocking to me. And, I am talking about tech, this is, 15, 20 years ago. We had this joke, like, what's worse, politics or tech? Or I don't know, what would you
I
say?
think I think that's equal opportunity offenders is I think what the word for that would be. We all know politics and tech tend to be male dominated fields. And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't take away the experience of men who've gone through this, but it does seem to happen statistically more in those types of fields where women are not the average or not the norm. And there's been a lot of like attempts recently, probably in the past decade, not only to ensure that the diversity factor of having women on your board and having women in your executive team and having women who are in positions of authority to help change the culture, but there's also been a lot of this like hand-tailored training, I would say, for different companies and different organizations. I used to give a training when I was still being borrowed occasionally by the political party that I used to work for to do a training called Don't Fuck the Intern. And it was a very
so descriptive. Yeah.
I mean, to me, it seemed pretty simple, right? But again, it's these things that need to be said because we use the term sexual harassment and we use the term workplace discrimination. We don't say, just don't fuck the intern. It's not that hard. It's not that difficult of a concept. And workplace romance is different than sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is unwelcome contact, contact. Right? So if you have a flirtation or you develop a relationship with somebody in your workplace and you're both happy, consent is awesome, but like, don't fuck the intern. It's not that hard. There's power imbalances that we don't speak about very openly. There are a lot of specific questions that men have that men aren't given a chance to ask without being torn up one side and down the other, because everybody's like, of course you shouldn't do that. Geez. But realistically, they're asking because they don't know, because the trainings they've gone through haven't been as explicit as they need to be. Like I had DFTI buttons and stickers that I would give to people, and they wear them around after these trainings, and people would be like, oh, what does that mean? And they would say it and it would shock them, but it would shock them because it needed to. Because sometimes you have to be a little shocking and a little explicit to get the point across. Like, oh, I'm sorry, are you offended by my language? I'm offended by you fucking the intern.
Right.
It's one of those things where it's absolutely crazy. And the way that reporting happens and the way that situations are handled internally is extremely problematic, because no matter what, an injury has occurred, right? Like someone has been either made to feel uncomfortable, or they've actually been assaulted, or your work product is going to suck. You're not going to be able to work with or around that person. You're going to have these experiences where you're no longer the best employee that you can possibly be. And like you mentioned, your entire perception of the people around you dramatically changes. There's no way around.
I know, like in a traditional corporate, like if I worked at Zonos, I worked with Joshua over there, and something happened, he would be the guy that I would go to, and there would be like action taken. What happens at the house or at the state when something happens?
So when I was there, we did not have an HR department. They do now have an HR department where it's specifically for staff and other individuals who work on or around the Hill. Like even if you're a lobbyist or just someone who was made uncomfortable by somebody, you can go to that HR department and talk to people. And at that point, you can figure out how to do this. And I think this was either in a KUTV article or something. I don't know. There's been a lot lately that I've tried desperately not to read to rehash old feelings. But When I was there, there was a lawyer who was assigned to handle kind of workplace disputes. And it was this lawyer who we were supposed to go to if we felt uncomfortable or like we were being harassed or if it was a toxic work environment. And at the same time where my kind of dramatic interactions with this legislator was happening, the whole, if you haven't, feel free to Google my name. I'm out there. It's awful. But like him trying to get me to go do body shots at his house, or like the melting in the mouth conversation. There was a whole lot of gross, right? But something else was happening with a different person at the same time. And I was watching this other person go through this experience, right? Where she went to speak to the person we were supposed to speak to, simply to find out like, what would happen if I wanted to make this official? Like, and so she gives the details of her specific situation. And the lawyer's like, okay, we won't make it official. It's fine. Because she didn't want it to be official. But let me talk to my boss and we'll see what can be done, what can protect you, what we might need to do. And so she goes and speaks to her boss. And that's when they realized that those lawyers were there to protect the legislature and the legislators and not legislative staff, which is why pretty quickly thereafter, an HR department was formed by legislative leadership. They created an entirely new department to help combat that. But I'm watching this and I'm watching her go through this. And without her consent, these stories are being shared with the same legislator who harassed her and went through this experience with her. And how does she not face repercussions for that?
Right.
And I'm watching this all happen, and I'm watching the potential of retaliation and going through all of this and thinking, absolutely not. No.
Yeah.
I'm just not going there. And in that environment where there's a grand total of 20 total staffers all year round for 104 legislators, there might be one bad legislator in that bunch. There might be one bad legislator. But if that one bad legislator interacts with 2 out of 20 employees and makes them uncomfortable to the point where they don't want to work with him anymore, what do? You all of a sudden have these 2 employees who can no longer perform their duties because of this one elected official.
Well, and interns come and go, and they're only there for a handful of months throughout the year, and the same goes for companies. If they feel like the company isn't doing anything, it's just easier to leave. And so then that problem never gets really addressed, and that culture begins to cultivate, and it's amazing how one person can ruin it for so many, and I'm sure it's frustrating because I know so many outstanding men in tech that would never even cross this line, and they get shocked when I tell them stories. They're shocked by it, and I know in that situation they would stand up for me, but you have a handful of bad actors, and you'd hate for that to be the reputation that the whole organization has as a whole. You don't want to say everyone in tech is going to sexually harass someone, but you have enough of them, and it starts to cultivate this story and this culture. So I guess knowing all of this, and this has been very therapeutic for me to get this off, because I share these stories sometimes with close friends. Doing it in a public setting was honestly like, but I don't know why I feel shame. I don't know why I feel shame about this, because I didn't really. It wasn't anything that I did, it happened to me, but I still feel some shame. What are the things that you think that, I mean, there's a question in here, like how does Utah rank against other states? How do we make Utah better? Because if anything, I think we tend to like to lead out on being, our kindness, our efficiencies, and all these other things. Like, why wouldn't we lead out on making sure that the work environment, is safe for women, and that there's equality?
Yeah, so I can't speak entirely to how Utah is different. My own personal experiences are pretty dramatic. I've worked in Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Utah is the only place, like people make off-color comments, but Utah is the only place where I've been aggressively pursued and been told to just deal with it on multiple occasions and multiple instances. But again, these are a small group of people, so I can't apply that to other states. I can say though that people have been so careful not to talk about sex that their avoidance of those conversations has led to dramatically increased sexual harassment. Can you imagine like walking into a corporate office and like in the boardroom with a staff meeting saying, okay, guys, we're going to talk about sex. Like it just wouldn't happen. But the reality is you absolutely need to.
Oh, wait, someone's raising their hand like that has happened, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah,
I would love to know where you worked.
yeah,
So.
exactly. But that's the reality of the situation is the more we talk about it, the more we talk about the experiences that we have, and the more we openly share, and I mean openly. I am a part of an all women Slack group, and there is a list of men who are gross and dangerous and not safe to be alone with. There is a list of these men and these personal experiences that have been added onto it. And you know who doesn't have that list? The other men who work around them. They don't know
Why?
their experiences. And
Yeah.
I think it's incredibly important for us to share those, even without names, like we've tried to do as much as humanly possible. But even without names, they need to know what's happening, and they need to know it's happening regularly.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the, experiences that people have had is when it comes up, they're like, have I, to reflect back and be like, oh, did I ever do that? I think these are great to hear the examples, because then it might be like, oh, I would never sexually harass someone, but I sure have. Oh, you know what? That paying an unwanted compliment to someone, maybe I have done that, and I would have not necessarily classified that as, sexual harassment. I'll never forget this guy that I worked with. Bless his heart. He called me a beautiful Oriental, and it was like the most backhanded
Oh my
compliment
God.
and I sat there and I was like, oh my goodness. And my no one said anything. I was really embarrassed, by it. My boss called me that night and he said, did that comment offend you? And I was like, yes. And he was like, okay, let me deal with it, and I was like, thank you, but
Yeah.
I probably would have never brought that up, because he called me beautiful at the same time, called me Oriental, you just don't do that. But it was just, I think, and I didn't, he was an older guy from a different generation, I didn't think that he was trying to, there was no sexual connotation, but it was offensive, he never did it again, and I was very appreciative that, someone recognized maybe that I was very uncomfortable with that. But, I think that, you do have to call out these behaviors and specific examples so that people will learn, because I think some of us just don't know.
Yeah. So what we might go a little long because I want to address one more thing. So Corey, thank you for your comment. And I think that that's a really important distinction to understand. I absolutely could publish that list. But let me read you some statistics. 85 to 95% of people don't file a formal complaint. 7 out of 10 incidents are never reported to superiors. 75% of those who report harassment in their organizations experience workplace retaliation, even though that's straight up illegal. Above and beyond that, 3.3 to 6% of cases make it to trial, and only 2% of those cases, of the 3 to 6% that even made it to trial, are won. However, if you expose somebody's name and you attach specific experiences to it, you are then liable for libel and defamation. So no matter what, there's no real way for us except to continuously have these conversations without names, because I mean, again, just Google, most of the names are out there. But the reality of the situation is that women are put in a closet and told that they're not allowed to function outside of that closet without the permission of the people who have been sexually harassing them. And it's a huge, huge problem. And the more we call it out in our workplaces, at the legislature, in whatever industry you happen to be in, the more we have those casual conversations about it. Like, it doesn't have to be that really awkward training where everybody has like their nose in a notepad because nobody wants to look up while the trainer is talking about specific instances of sexual harassment, because nobody either wants to be read because they're the one who reported it, or see somebody read because they're the one who would be, you know, the person who actually committed the sexual harassment. Like, nobody wants to go through that. So if we have these more casual conversations, if we keep talking about it, and you might be sick of it, people might be sick of it. I don't care anymore. Let's just get back to work. I'm sorry, I can't work with his hand up my skirt.
Right.
It's really, really hard to type when someone's grabbing my boob.
Yeah.
No. So if we make it a little bit funny, and if we continuously commit ourselves to talking about these experiences openly, there won't be any more retaliation, because every woman will have a story to tell, and there won't be any space to allow women to feel cornered or shut down or shut up in any way. I think it's really, really important we just keep talking.
Yeah. Well, Liz, I appreciate you being willing to, take this, because I mean, it certainly wasn't my idea. So, but when you talked to me, I was like, oh, sure, I can have this conversation. I think it would be useful. I think it would help people. And so we're just glad for everybody to join and hear these stories, and, Liz being so vulnerable and people providing their feedback. And, it sounds like politics has some work to do. It sounds like some tech people have some work to do. So, let's make this a group effort.
You can only, the dark places are where everything bad gets to hide. You can shine a light on it, and then there's no more dark places. So there is resolution in sight. I can promise you that.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate your time.